Okay, it looks like they have once again just dropped the latest playtest for 5.5 just out of nowhere, or either that or I keep missing the notifications from when they're going to put out these things. Either way, it looks like this time we have the Barbarian, Druid, and Monk to look at. Only one subclass for each, but I think that's because they're focusing more on the core classes and the changes there. And I'll admit, I've gone ahead and I've skimmed through this a little bit, and I gotta say, I'm liking what I'm seeing, especially with the Monk. We might finally have a most improved on our hands. But first things first, we might as well go ahead and do this in order. So let's start with the Barbarian. And right off the bat, there's actually a pretty significant change that needs to be pointed out. So the first big change is to Rage. And basically, it's mostly the same. You know, resistance to physical damage, increased damage, advantage on strength checks, etc., etc. They still have the bonus action to extend your rage ability. That makes sense. I like that. However, they have added that you now regain one expended use when you finish a short rest, in addition to regaining all uses when you finish a long rest. This is something that I think a lot of people have been wanting for a while, because it's always kind of awkward that Barbarian is the one martial class that isn't reliant on short rests. Like, the whole kind of selling point of martial classes in many ways is that they're supposed to be better for sustained long adventuring days. Like, if you're having like 10 fights in a day, you want to have people like the rogue and the fighter who can recover most of their resources on a short rest, so that they can actually keep fighting at full efficiency. Meanwhile, the Barbarian was always in this awkward spot where rages were this long rest resource, and as a result, they could actually run out of their key class ability and be significantly less useful over the course of a long adventuring day. So having a short rest refresh on your rages is a massive boon that really brings them up to par with the other martials in the ability to sustain themselves across long days. But I will admit, I am a little bit worried about this. It's not bad for the Barbarian. It's obviously great for the Barbarian. The issue comes with multi-classing. And I think this is the main reason why they didn't do it previously. Because you see, now, especially because this is now an ability you get at first level, that means that if anybody wanted to, they could take a single level in Barbarian, get Rage, and then even though they only get 2 rages per day, they can refresh those rages on a short rest, which makes them considerably more useful, especially to other martial classes. So I'm a little bit worried that with the way that Rage works now, that it might end up becoming this kind of weird thing, somewhat similar to how Warlocks were for a while with Eldritch Blast. Like, I imagine Barbarians might become something similar, where a lot of people just dip into Barbarian for one level, get the Rage that refreshes on a short rest, and then move on to other classes just with the buffs that Rage grants. So, one possible solution to this could be to at least make it so that it's like, at second level, you get, you know, back 1 Rage on a short rest, or maybe even wait till like 4th or 5th level for that. I know it's technically a nerf compared to what it is now, but it's just something to think about, because multi-classing is kind of this double-edged blade where, you know, I love multi-classing. I think it adds a lot of great options to the game, but you do gotta be worried about your first level abilities being a little bit too front-loaded and potentially useful for other classes. I mean, hell, you could potentially take Rage on like a caster or like a paladin or something, and as a result, suddenly now the paladin has access to resistance from physical damage on a short rest. Like, there's some edge cases here that I think could be worrisome. I definitely think that Rage should refresh on a short rest. Don't get me wrong, I just think that maybe it should wait until like level 3 or something, so that if you're gonna dip into it for multi-classing, you at least need to take more than a single level in order to get access to it. But, you know, maybe that's just me. I also feel like it would be a lot better if Rage just granted you temporary hit points. either in addition to resistance or even in place of it, just because I think temporary hit points is more versatile of a defensive feature, and it's able to better scale, because that's really the core problem, is that rage doesn't scale very well. And so I think that's why they originally made it so that it's limited by long rest and gives you more uses, because that's one of the few ways it actually scales, especially since the rage damage only scales by 2 points from level 1 to 20. Anyways, moving on, we got a lot more to talk about. A lot of the other stuff seems very similar. Reckless Attack is still the same, and, you know, I really feel like they could upgrade Reckless Attack to how it works in Baldur's Gate. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, you can do it at the beginning of your turn, as it is now, but, like, if you do it after your first attack, it's not like you can min-max it or something, because, like, the only person who is at a detriment by not doing it from your first attack is yourself. Because, like, even if you hit with your first attack, and then you, say, miss with your second, so you want to use it then, you still impose the penalty of having everybody else attack you with advantage. And all you've done is miss out on the opportunity of maybe turning that first hit into a crit. So letting you trigger it on any attack, or better yet, like I said, having it work like Baldur's Gate 3, where you can trigger it anytime you miss an attack to give yourself advantage in order to try and turn that miss into a hit, I think that would be a perfectly fine change that would make it a little bit more interesting of an ability, because right now, you don't really have a reason to not just use it all the time, in most situations, in my opinion, especially as we get to the later abilities that we'll be talking about later. Primal Knowledge, I believe, is still mostly the same from how it used to be, and I still think that this is a great change to Barbarians that gives them a lot more out-of-combat utility, level 4 feet, level 5 extra attack, level 5 fast movement, all the usual stuff. Feral Instinct, advantage on initiative rolls, Instinctive Pounce, I believe that's all the same. Brutal Strike is our first really, really big change, and it is a good one. Now, if you recall, the current Barbarian ability at level 9, which this is replacing, is Brutal Critical, which is essentially you get better critical hits, which really is not anything to write home about. They've tried to buff it and change it in some ways throughout the playtest, but at the end of the day, it's just a bad ability. I've gone over this before in some of my older videos, but to kind of summarize, essentially the core issue is that it's an ability that only triggers on crits, which means that even with Reckless Attack, that's only about a 10% uptime, and even then, the damage bonus is not that great. In fact, if I recall correctly, on average, it's only like +2 damage a turn, and that's with the highest level version of the ability. Because keep in mind, Brutal Critical, it takes up your 9th level ability, your 13th level ability, and your 17th level ability. You get 0 other abilities at those levels, effectively, other than, like, increasing your proficiency bonus and such. So, as a result, it's the most, like, you're wasting 3 entire levels for +2 damage, and that's it. So, it's just an ability that needed to go. Like, there was no salvaging it. You could keep increasing the damage to try and make it, like, work mathematically, but the problem is still that it's an ability that is completely outside of the player's control and doesn't give them any interesting options to work with. So what have they done? They've given the player something that gives you interesting options to work with. So let's go over the new ability. So now, it actually synergizes with Reckless Attack, with the idea being that now when you use Reckless Attack, you can actually forego the advantage on one of your attacks in order to do more damage. Which means that right off the bat, like, even if it just stopped here, that this is already a better ability than the old Brutal Critical, because like I said, on average you only got +2 damage a turn with the old version of Brutal Critical, whereas just this first ability here, where you forego advantage to get an extra d10 of damage, that's already over 5 points of damage extra per turn that you could potentially get just from that part of the ability. So it's literally more than twice as good, and there's still more. Because now, in addition, when you hit and deal that extra damage, you can also choose to either push the target up to 15 feet away, and it doesn't look like there's a saving throw, which is nice. And then on top of that, you can also chase down the target without provoking opportunity attacks. So you can take advantage of that fast movement and really just chase people down. Or you can use Hamstring Blow to reduce their speed by 15 feet and basically root them in place. So, like I said, it gives you options where you can choose between getting advantage or getting more damage, which is, that in itself is an interesting choice. But then on top of that, when you deal that damage, you get to choose between 2 more abilities. So, like, it's so much better than Brutal Critical, it's not even comparable. Like, this is actually a really cool and interesting ability for the Barbarian. The only criticism that I think I could possibly levy at it is the fact that it only comes online at level 9. It would be kinda nice if they got something like this, like at level 5, when that way, because like, level 9, you're already almost halfway through, you know, the whole game. Like, a lot of campaigns, and I bring this up a lot, but it's important to recognize, a lot of campaigns end around, like, levels 10 to 12. So, like, this is, like, a top-tier ability for how a lot of games actually play out. And before level 9, they don't get a ton of interesting combat abilities beyond, like, weapon mastery, and even that's kinda iffy. So it's like, it would be nice if maybe they got the first version of this at level 5. Like, hell, maybe if it was just the ability to forego the advantage on attacks for the extra damage at level 5, and then at level 9 is when it got upgraded to add these extra abilities, I would take that, because that's still at least a choice to make in combat that gives you interesting options. It's effectively a Barbarian power attack just by default, and then it can get upgraded into this other stuff. And speaking of upgrades, that's what they do now with the other levels that Brutal Critical used to take up. So now you get Brutal Strike Improvement at level 13. You have Staggering Blow, which means that now you can impose disadvantage, and Sundering Blow, which allows you to make it so that other people get bonuses to the attack. So you can either make them weaker or your allies stronger. And this is in addition to the choices that of either basically knocking them back or slowing them down. So now you have 4 different options. And then at level 17, when you're broaching your capstone, you get double the damage, so now it does an average of like 11 damage bonus whenever you use it. And then on top of that, you can use 2 effects at once. So now you can like push somebody back 15 feet and root them in place, or give them a disadvantage and root them in place so that they're basically screwed. Like, it gives you so many good options. It gives you a ton of bonus damage. It's an interesting choice. Like, this is just so much better of an ability than Brutal Critical. Like, this really showcases how worthless of an ability Brutal Critical is, because, like, even if you don't do the math, Brutal Critical was still something that you could only use on a crit. Like, best case scenario, even if they rebalanced it so it actually does good amount of damage, it's still, like, this just gives you so many options and is actually fun to use. Like, the Barbarians have choices now. It's insane. So for so long, the entire Barbarian class has just had passives and no actual tactical decisions to make. Now they can actually make a choice and actually choose to do something in combat. Oh my god, I could practically cry. But yeah, I think that's most of the major changes. Let's see here. Persistent Rage, actually. Let me double check that real quick. So when you roll initiative, you can regain all expended uses of Rage. That's right. So yeah, once per day, you basically get back all your rages, and you don't need to do anything to maintain it, which is good because that opens up, I guess, some room for like tool-handed build or just otherwise opening up your bonus action. So that's nice. But yeah, like I said, the main criticisms, I think, are that it would be nice if the Barbarians got some other active ability before level 9. But I mean, right now, I love Brutal Strike as it is, as well as its upgrades. So that's an A+ on that front. I just want, you know, more. you know. And like I said, I would like it if Rage gave you some kind of better scaling ability, and if they locked the short rest recovery, you know, up a couple levels, just so that it wasn't so easily accessible via multi-classing. Moving on to the subclass, there's just a few notes here. They have made it so that now you automatically get temporary hit points with the Path of the World Tree. That's cool. I also like that, I like the sheer amount of hit points that you're able to give to your allies. I think that's cool. I think that might be the same as before. But yeah, so Branches of the World Tree, this got changed slightly. They mentioned it here, is that now it triggers at the start of a creature's turn instead of the end, which makes sense because the problem with triggering stuff at the end of a creature's turn is that it becomes more of an area denial more than anything else, because now it's really easy to avoid the effect, because now, like, when a creature starts in the area, that just means they need to leave it by the end of their turn, which means that they could potentially still, like, attack an ally in the area and then just leave. Or, like, you know, and potentially take that attack of opportunity or things like that. Like, it becomes a lot easier to avoid the ability and exploit, like, loopholes in it. Whereas now, by having it start at the start of a creature's turn, that means that the Barbarian can now just yank somebody before they have a chance to do anything, and then on top of that, it now works where after you yank somebody to you, you can reduce their speed to 0, so that they're effectively forced to deal with you. And I think that's great because it gives the Barbarian a lot more aggro draw, where they could just basically force people to pay attention to them, which is really what the Barbarian's job is. Battering Roots, I think, is mostly the same. But they did clarify that you can now activate both the push or topple effect and whatever the normal mastery property on the weapon you're using is, which means you can combine things like push and topple, or, you know, like Vex or whatever. I mean, in general, people just want this ability so that they can basically be Kratos. I mean, let's be real here. The increased reach by 10 feet, the ability to push or pull people, like, there's a lot of cool things you could do with it. Overall, good ability. Travel along the tree. So this one actually changed significantly from how it used to be in the previous playtest, where they showed this off. So, in the previous one, I believe all that this ability did... Let me pull it up real quick. Yeah, so if we look... This is the previous playtest here, and if we look at the old version of Travel Along the Tree, it essentially was the ability to teleport to teleportation circles and to plane shift. And that was it. And don't get me wrong, I thought that was cool, and it allowed for a really interesting utility for Barbarian that, like, they don't normally get access to. However, the problem is that it doesn't offer any actual in-combat utility. Like, it's purely just a utility for out-of-combat situations, and offers no actual combat potential, which is kind of weird for a Barbarian subclass. So what they've done is they've changed it almost too far in the opposite direction, in my opinion. Now it's solely a combat ability, where you can basically teleport up to 60 feet as a bonus action while you're raging, and that's cool, but I kind of wish that there was more to it. Like, there is a semi-utility thing where you can choose to bring up to 6 willing creatures with you who are within 10 feet of you, and then the teleport increases its range to 500 feet. But you can only do that once per rage, and that's fine. But I feel like they could have kept the plane shifting thing, because, like, that was a really cool and flavorful ability. And I think they could still include that. Like, why not just have both, in my opinion? It's level 14. We're already in the crazy tier. Why not let the Barbarian teleport in combat and plane shift out of combat? Like, I think that offered some really cool utility for the Barbarian, and I don't see any reason why they couldn't still include it here. So, I kind of hope they bring back the plane shift. It can even still be super expensive, where, like, you have to spend almost all your rages in order to use it. And honestly, that isn't as bad now that you can recover your rages using a persistent rage. Which means that actually you can now plane shift there and back if you combine both abilities. But yeah, so, like, that's like the one thing I would like to see is bring back the plane shifting. Like, I think that was really cool and neat. So yeah, moving on to the Druid. Now, I will admit I'm not much of a Druid player personally, so I do not have nearly as much to say about this class, but I will say just a few things. Um, so now, the biggest change, I think, is that they have gone back to essentially the normal wild shape system. For in the previous playtest, or one of the previous playtests at least, they were testing out this system of using templates instead of animals, where you have like a basic land beast template and sea beast and sky beast or whatever, and then you just adopted that template instead of a specific monster stat block, and that was it. I honestly really liked that as a concept. I just think it was poorly implemented because they kind of balanced the templates really low to the point where you actually got like weaker by adopting an animal form, which is kind of the opposite to what people adopt animal forms in the first place for. Like, you don't normally adopt like the form of a bear because you want to get hit harder. So it was just kind of like poorly balanced and not very well thought out. And I think it could have worked if they added more interesting variations and abilities to it. Like, the biggest thing that a lot of people suggested was the ability to add like a sort of warlock invocation style system where you could learn certain traits, like say poisonous or like bigger fangs or whatever, and then you would apply those to your templates to sort of craft the creature that you turn into, and then that sort of freedom for flavoring allows you to do a lot of interesting things with it. Like, you don't have to worry about the fact that an owlbear is technically too high of a CR for you to be able to turn into it. You could just be an owlbear and then use the templates for your stats so that, it still remains balanced and things like that. Or maybe you don't even turn into, like, a specific kind of animal. You're turning into some kind of, like, amalgamation that you came up, or you become, like, a spore beast or whatever fits your druid circle. Like, it opened the room for a lot of interesting flavor that I thought was really cool. But I mean, I guess it makes sense that they would just go back to how it was, where you choose different animals. But one very specific change is that now there is a forms known element instead of it just being like sort of loosey-goosey with it. Like, if we go back to the original Druid and look at wild shape, the only real limitation on the forms that you could turn into is just that it has to be a beast that you have seen before that fits within the CR limit. So it was always kind of an awkward sort of situation at a lot of tables of like, oh, I want to turn into a dinosaur, and then the DM has to go, have you seen a dinosaur? And then you just kind of go, I don't know, have I? It's a weird thing where like your backstory can actually dramatically change the power level of the ability, because like if you grew up in the mountains or whatever, then you're only going to see, like, mountain creatures. Whereas if you grew up in, like, Chult, then you'll have seen a ton of dinosaurs. And so, like, it can kind of dramatically change how powerful wild shape is based off of what you've encountered. And in turn, it kind of has the ranger problem of making it so that, depending on the campaign, if you fight a lot of dinosaurs, then you can turn into dinosaurs. If you don't find any kind of beasts, then you're probably not going to have a ton of things that you can turn into. Not to mention that it also meant that, like, you could have potentially dozens of different animal forms that you could adopt at any given time, which led to, like, it's kind of hard to keep the balance in check as a result. So, I like the addition of adding an actual specific, like, okay, when you gain this ability, you have a specific list of creatures you can turn into that you add to over time, so that your DM can go, okay, you can turn into a wolf, a spider, and a horse, and that's it. I don't have to worry about you turning into anything else. And, like, that way the DM can actually kind of plan around your transformations, which I think is just kind of healthy for the game overall. They've also made it so that you get temporary hit points equal to your druid level. I think that's cool. Makes it it's kind of something that I think a lot of people have been suggesting. The old sort of only adopting the health of the creature system was always kind of weird and finicky, and making it so that you get temp HP when you adopt wild shape makes sense. A few other changes that I've noticed is that they seem to have added sort of like two different variations of Druid that you can go down. Essentially, like at level 1 and at a few other levels as you level up, you get choices between essentially what kind of Druid you want to be, with one of them being more like rage and magic focused with the Magician, and this one, you know, you get extra cantrips and you get bonus to intelligence checks and whatnot. And then you have the Warden, which is the much more like upfront battle martial melee Druid. And like if you look at some of these other abilities that you get, let's see here, yeah, Elemental Fury. You get to choose either Potent Spellcasting, which lets you add your Wisdom modifier to Druid cantrips, or Primal Strike, which makes Wild Shape attacks deal more damage. So like I said, it's further like, do you want to be a ranged spellcaster or a melee, you know, striker? And you can still mix and match these, which is nice. You're not locked into one path or the other. And I mean, there are actually a few things here, like whenever you cast a Druid cantrip with a range of 10 feet or greater, the spell's range increases by 300 feet. That's a little bit silly. In fact, isn't Thorn Whip within that category? Like, it technically has 10 feet, which means that you can make a melee spell attack from 300 feet away. I mean, hey, you're level 15 at that point, you know, whatever, right? But I mean, if you're going melee Druid, you probably just want to take Primal Strike, but something just feels a little bit underwhelming about just getting 2d8 damage compared to casting cantrips from 300 feet away. I don't know, maybe that's just me. And then they've rebalanced Archdruid to where, because previously you just got unlimited wild shapes, which was a bit much, especially with how the old HP system worked. So now it's just whenever you roll initiative and have no uses, you can regain one, so that you always have access to it. You just don't get infinite amounts of it for free, which is nice. And then finally, Nature Magician is kind of the peak for, you know, the ranged spellcaster style of Druid, which lets you use wild shapes kind of like sorcery points on sorcerers, where you can convert them back and forth between spell slots, which is kind of interesting. And then finally, Longevity is, I think, mostly just a flavor ability, where you just basically become functionally immortal. Like, you can live for, like, basically 1,000 years, if not longer. So, you know, all the usual stuff. Circle of the Moon, it seems like they've changed this dramatically, because if I recall correctly, Circle of the Moon used to be the elemental style Druid, and now it's a lot more, you know, moon-themed, which I guess makes sense. But it also seems completely different from what it used to be. It's still definitely the wild shape focused subclass, where, you know, you get a higher CR for your wild shapes, you get better AC, better temporary hit points, etc., etc. But now, instead of being able to turn into elementals, you get radiant damage and like bonuses to Constitution saves and the ability to like teleport and stuff. And like, it seems cool, I guess. It's very different from what it used to be. But like I said, I'm not a huge Druid player, so, you know, go ahead, leave me a comment down below if you have some more feedback on these abilities specifically. As usual, I'll leave a link to the playtest in the description so you can look at it yourself. But to be fair, you do get like elemental damage for free as part of the base subclass now. So I guess if you wanted to play, you know, a Fire Badger or whatever, what you previously have to be Circle of the Moon to do, now you could just do that by default as a Druid, and like be like, oh yes, I'm playing as like an Ice Elk or whatever, and like that's kind of cool. But yeah, like I said, I don't have a ton to say on Druid, so let's just move on to the Monk. Okay, so this is the big boy, the problem child of D&D, and many games for that matter. The Monk. The Monk has really always been an issue, and it's almost always due to the same problems, which is that the Monk almost always needs way more stats to be good in order to be effective. And that's the same problem in 5e, it's the same problem in 3.5, it's the same problem in, you know, older, like, it's always been the Monk's problem. And I don't think they've done a lot to address that specifically, but they have done a lot to make the Monk just generally better than it used to be, by a long shot. Because another big problem that the monk had is that it's way too easy to run out of ki, especially at low levels. So right off the bat, one of the first new abilities that monks get is uncanny metabolism. And what this does is make it so that when you roll initiative, you can regain all of your expended discipline points for free once per day. So now, keep in mind, you normally get back all of your ki or discipline. I'm going to keep calling it ki points for the record, just because it's faster. But they are technically called discipline points, or DP now. Anyways, you get back all of your ki points normally on a short rest anyways. But this makes it so that if you're, doing fight after fight, and you don't have time to take a short rest, now you can get back all that ki points a lot more quickly, like in an emergency situation, which I think makes them a lot more generally sustainable throughout a day. And like that especially helps at low levels, because you could basically use it to like double your ki points when you're, doing a couple of fights at low levels in a row. Another few minor changes to keep in mind. So they've made it so that the monk weapon category, instead of it being like specific defined weapons, because if you look at the old monk, they specifically say that monk weapons are, short swords and any simple weapons, some simple melee weapons that don't have the two-handed or heavy property. And that's it. So now, simple melee weapons, just period, just nothing else, just simple melee weapons, and then martial weapons that have the light property. There's a few interesting things to note about this. So if we pull up the weapon table, so now you don't have to have light simple weapons, or rather, like I said, it was previously simple melee weapons that weren't two-handed or heavy. Well, now you can use two-handed or heavy simple weapons like the Great Club, for example, or the Javelin. Or actually, no, that's not. Let's see here. What else? Is there really only the Great Club? Two-handed. Oh, huh. I thought there was more two-handed or... Huh. Yeah, I guess, pulling back up the basic equipment, there's really only one two-handed simple melee weapon, and that's the Great Club. So, I mean, you can use a Great Club now as a monk. So, there's that. But the other one that is interesting is that it also includes any martial weapon that has the light property, not just melee weapons. So, while obviously that it does include the melee weapons, so you can do things like, wield scimitars or short swords or whatever, you can also now use hand crossbows as a monk, which I think is interesting. I don't know if that was intentional, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's actually kind of a cool idea to potentially allow for like a crossbow master sort of gun monk, I guess crossbow monk style hybrid without needing to really do anything special. I mean, even with crossbow master, it's still only a 30-foot range, so like you still got to be pretty close to the enemy. And I mean, it's not like you couldn't use thrown weapons before, so you could always just use like daggers or hand axes or whatever. Like, so the monks already had ranged options in theory. So hand crossbows, I think that's actually kind of a cool expansion of what the monks are capable of. The ability to use a hand crossbow with the monk's martial arts die is also nice. So hey, I'll take it. They also clarify that the dexterous attacks thing lets you use dexterity both for the attack and damage rolls, and when you use grapple or shove, you can use your dex modifier instead of strength to determine the saving throw. I think that's just a little bit of cleanup. I think that was always intended, and they just didn't mention it before. But, it's always good. Okay, so first big set of changes for the monk is finally making them not just worse rogues. This was always one of the stupidest things about 5e, in my opinion, and it still shocks me to this day that it both got into the game at all, and it has taken this long to fix it. Like, if you look at a rogue, right? Rogues get, at second level, cunning action. they get the ability to dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action, which makes sense. It fits the flavor of a rogue because they're super fast and agile. Meanwhile, a monk in 5e gets the ability to take Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, or Step of the Wind, all of which require key points, and Step of the Wind is disengage or dash as a bonus action, except it costs key points, which you start with 2 of. So the rogue is able to literally dash, disengage for free every turn, pretty much no matter what. Meanwhile, the rogue, to do the literal exact same thing, has to spend one of their valuable resources that they need for a lot of their other abilities. Sure, Patient Defense is nice because bonus action dodges are quite good, but the fact that they disengage and dashing cost a key point, like, that was just hilariously bad. So they've gone ahead and, like, that's the first big change. Patient Defense now lets you disengage as a bonus action just for free. And Step of the Wind lets you dash as a bonus action, again, just for free. And it's also worth noting that the bonus Unarmed Strike just lets you make a bonus action unarmed attack, no penalties or anything, and you don't need to take the attack action. That's one of the other annoying limitations of how martial arts worked, is that it was when you use the attack action, and it has to specifically be with an unarmed strike or a monk weapon, then you can make an unarmed strike as a bonus action. Now, you could just make an unarmed strike as a bonus action whenever you want. So if you want to, like, use your main action to, like, cast a spell, or use an ability, or grapple somebody, or anything like that, or even, like, use an item, you can still bonus action unarmed strike afterwards, or even before that. The first thing you do on your turn could be a bonus action unarmed strike, and then you do other stuff, depending on how that plays out. It just gives the monk a lot more versatility in how they use their abilities. And then now, obviously, Flurry of Blows, pretty much the same. You get to make 2 attacks as a bonus action. But now, you spend a key point to upgrade Patient Defense and Step of the Wind. So now, when you actually want to spend a key point, you get to disengage and dodge as a bonus action. And when you use Step of the Wind, you can dash and disengage as a bonus action, which really gives the monk a lot of versatility and power to work with. Like, being able to disengage and dodge basically makes you untouchable. Like, you could just run through an entire crowd of enemies, and they basically just can't touch you. And then Step of the Wind, it allows you to be immune to opportunity attacks and cross the entire battlefield in a single turn really easily. I mean, the fact that they can just dash in general for free with monks' increased base movement just means that monks are finally, like, as fast as they should be. Now, I already mentioned that Uncanny Metabolism lets you refresh your key points, so you can also use these a lot more often. The next big change, right off the bat at level 3, like, basically everything early on about monks has been changed. But yeah, so Deflect Attacks, you'll notice that is different from how it used to be with Deflect Missiles. And that's because previously, Deflect Missiles only worked on, well, missiles, aka ranged attacks. Specifically ranged weapons, too. Now, it works on basically anything. Or at least anything physical, I should say. So now, if you get hit by a melee attack that does physical damage, or a ranged attack that does physical damage, you can reduce the incoming damage. And, like, that makes a lot more sense to me, because, again, monks are frontline fighters. Like, they need more survivability in melee in order to really be able to do what they do. So, having defense against ranged attacks is nice for approaching, but they already had the ability to run super fast. Like, getting into where they need to be has never really been the monk's problem. The problem has been surviving once they get there. So, being able to redirect melee attacks in the same way that they deflect missiles, I think is a massive boon for them. And on top of that, they also kind of standardize the effect of actually deflecting the missile. So when you deflect and redirect the attack, it used to be that you just dealt the damage of the attack back at the attacker, or whatever other creature you wanted to target it towards. Now it actually deals damage based on your martial arts die, and I think that makes sense because now you don't have to worry about like weird edge case situations where somebody like throws a poison dart at you with like some kind of super drow poison, or somebody's throwing like an arrow of slaying at you and then you redirect it and it does like 4d10 damage or something absurd like that. So now the damage is just 2 times your martial arts die plus your dexterity modifier. So now it's like it's a consistent amount of damage. You don't have to worry about it being like, oh, a kobold threw an axe at me, it's going to do 2 damage. You know, now it actually like, oh, it dealt more damage, you know, that kind of thing. So deflect attacks, very solid improvement. Slow fall, I believe, is the same. Extra attack. Stunning strike, next big change. So stunning strike, again, has always been this weird thing where it's almost too good, and as a result, monks were incentivized to basically spend all of their resources on it. But it was also this very feel-bad mechanic where when somebody failed the saving throw, you just got nothing out of it, so you just wasted your key point, and key is already a valuable resource, especially when you're still at low levels, like level 5. So as a result, you just got, like, if they failed, that was it. So limiting it to only once per turn helped with making it so that monks couldn't spend all their key points in one place, which was good, but it also made it hurt a little bit harder when you know, spent the key point and got nothing out of it, because now you couldn't even try again until your next turn. So now what they've done is it's still once per turn, it still stuns people, which is incredibly powerful, but if they pass the save, they get to take extra force damage. So it's going to be a lose-lose situation for them. Like, at the very least now, you always get something out of it. So, and I mean, it's not a tiny amount of damage either. It's force damage equal to your martial arts die plus your wisdom modifier. So, like, at the level you get it, that's, I think, a d8 plus, like, up to 5. So, you know, that's what, on average, like, 9 damage? Like, that's not bad. And that's just, you know, for free if they fail their check. Like, guaranteed 9 damage minimum, or you stun them for a turn. Like, that's just generally useful. Like, it's still something that I think you're going to probably want to do almost every single turn. But, like I said, at least now you have no reason to, like, burn all your key points just doing that and nothing else. And you always get something out of it, which is good. Empowered Strikes, it's a minor change for level 6. I believe it used to be that you would get magic damage, where, like, yeah, it would basically ignore non-magical resistances and immunities. Now it just makes it so that you can do force damage. It's so much simpler. I honestly wish they would kind of drop the whole, oh, it has resistance to non-magical weapons or whatever, because, like, all that does is impose a tax on martial characters to have a magic weapon at a certain point, at which point all of those are just nullified. So just having the monk be able to do force damage solves the problem. Way simpler. I like it. Acrobatic movement. This is the one ability that I'm not too keen on. If we look at the previous monk, it is basically the same thing, where they got unarmored movement improvement, where at 9th level, you can move along vertical surfaces in liquids without falling during your move. This is literally the same thing. I mean, do they get anything else at 9th level? 9th level is when you get increased your proficiency bonus, I guess, and that's it. Yeah, this feels like the most dead level to me because it's a very situational ability. I almost kind of wish that they would maybe add immunity to difficult terrain as well. I think that would make sense, it would fit the flavor, and it would come up a little bit more often than, say, trying to run across a lake. I mean, I guess it's a nice utility, because it means that monks can climb, like, super, super easily, and, like, get into various situations out of combat. But, like, the actual combat utility is very minimal. It feels like you could just use a little bit more. Like, it seems weird that this is all they get at that level. You know what I mean? Okay, so, back to the positives, though. Heightened discipline. So, I don't think there's any kind of comparison for this in the previous one. Like, all they got at level 10 previously was a further boost to unarmored movement and immunity to disease and poison, which is like whatever. Now they actually upgrade all of their martial arts stuff. So right off the bat, now Flurry of Blows does 3 attacks. I love this. It's so simple, but it does a very important thing that always has bugged me, which is that fighters eventually catch up to the attack output of a monk. Like, even before you take into account Action Surge, obviously. Like, fighters eventually get 4 attacks, and a monk gets 2 attacks base, and then if they spend a key point, they get 2 more attacks as a bonus action in normal 5e. Now, with this, they get 3 bonus action attacks, which means that they come out at 5 attacks, which means monks can now finally reclaim their position at the top of the attack speed hierarchy. Like, monks are now the ones that attack the most, which is really how it should always have been, you know? So right off the bat, like I said, very simple ability, I kind of love it. I also wouldn't mind if instead of this, they just made it so that monks got a 3rd basic attack instead of only sticking with 2. But you know what? I'll take it. Then you have Patient Defense. And what they do is now, when you spend a key point to upgrade Patient Defense, keeping in mind, by default, you can use Patient Defense to just disengage as a bonus action, or you can upgrade it with a key point to disengage and dodge. But now at level 10, when you do that, you get to disengage, dodge, and give yourself temporary hit points equal to 2 rolls of your martial arts die. And these don't seem to go away until, like, you rest, which means that if nobody's able to hit you, which makes sense because you disengage, so you're immune to attacks of opportunity, and you dodge, so everybody has disadvantage against you, that means that on future turns, those temporary hit points are going to help you stay alive in combat, which again is something the monk really needed. Then you have Step of the Wind, which is also, it's a really cool, like, it's both utility in and out of combat, which is what I really like to see. And what they do is make it so that when you use Step of the Wind, you can basically pick up another creature that is within 5 feet of you and move that creature with you until the end of your turn. Which means that you can basically, like, pick up your allies and, like, if you combine it with, say, your acrobatic movement, you could just run up a castle wall and be like, oh, hey, I'm just gonna, you know, pick you up and run you to that window that's 5 stories up, and then we're just gonna be there together. Like, that's a really cool ability, and it's useful in combat, too. Because now you can, like, ferry, like, say the Barbarian is standing next to you, and, like, you can reach the opponent that he needs to smack, but he cannot, because, like, he's restrained or slowed or whatever. You could just pick him up and, like, just pull him over there. And just carry him over, just dash, you know, 100,000 whatever feet that you can run as a monk, and just drop the Barbarian right next to the enemy, salute them, and run away. So yeah, it's a really fun ability. It doesn't increase the cost at all, which is great, and it makes them better. It's cool. Self-restoration, I think that's mostly the same. You can basically cure yourself of charm, frightened, or poison, and you don't have to eat anymore. I mean, that's mostly flavor, let's be real. I guess in a hardcore survival campaign, that could be really useful because you literally just don't need to eat. So, like, there's some interesting potential role-playing there. But other than that, you know, kind of whatever. But at level 13, there's an upgrade to deflect attacks that basically makes it work against anything. So now you can basically, like, if a wizard shoots, like, a scorching ray at you, you can now actually just punch it away from you, and if it reduces the damage to 0, you can now scorching ray the wizard right back. Honestly, this is something I feel like monks could have used for a while, so I'll take it. Level 14 is basically the same. You get proficiency in all saves. You can spend a key point to reroll. That's fine. Level 15, really nice ability. Whenever you roll initiative and have 3 points or fewer, you restore your key up to 4, so that you always have at least a small pool of key. Again, monks have always needed better key management abilities. I kind of wish it didn't come online only at level 15. This feels like an ability that could very easily scale. Like, for example, say you got this at level 5, right? Well, actually, no, to be fair, at level 2, you already get the ability to regain all your key points. So, like, I guess that kind of tides you over. You know, once per day, you can just refresh all your key points. It still feels like they could have done, like, oh, if you have, you know, like, it refreshes you always up to 2, then 3, then 4, and then at level 20, they could even make it 5, or whatever. So, like, I don't know. It's good. I'm not going to complain too much. There's already so much good stuff here. I really shouldn't be too nitpicky. And then finally, superior defense. Spend 3 key points to get resistance to all damage except force damage. That's pretty cool. I also kind of like the flavor that monks themselves can bypass it, which is kind of interesting. Because, like I said, the empowered strikes now deal force damage, which means that 2 monks can now essentially make themselves resistant to everything but another monk. So that's just kind of cool flavor. And then another cool thing, the capstone is now the Barbarian capstone, but for monks. Because if you recall, the Barbarian capstone is quite literally, at level 20, you increase your strength and con by 4, and their max reaches 26. And that the reason why it's 26 and not 24 is because the new version of the ability score increase feat allows you to go above 20 at level 20, so that you can have, like, one of your stats at 22. So now this way you can have a strength at like 26, then a con at 24. And monks are now the same way, where they get their dex and wisdom at increased by 4, and their cap is now 26 for the same reason. Now, I do kind of wish that it was a little bit more versatile, because there are some people that do play strength-based monks, and this kind of, like, locks monks into being dex-based exclusively. I think that it would be cool if you could choose between dex and strength in addition to wisdom, so that way, like, if somebody does want to, like, obviously dex-based monks are going to be the most optimal, because dexterity gives you defense, you know, in terms of your AC and your saving throws and everything a lot better. But, like, some people still want to play a strength-based monk just for the fun of it, and I think that the game should allow for that, because, like, the dexterous attacks, for example, it doesn't force you to use dexterity. You just can use dexterity instead of strength for attack and damage rolls. So, like, allowing the monk to still use strength is still an option. And so, like, I think it would be nice if you could choose between strength and dex. I'm just saying. But yeah, and then finally, moving on to the subclass. So, Way of the Hand, which is the sort of iconic subclass, I think. Let me pull that up. Way of the Open Hand. That's the Warrior of the Hand versus Open Hand. I think it's I think that's equivalent. Yeah, because they both get Quivering Palm. Yeah. So they did change a lot about this though. So the old one is Open Hand Technique. Whenever you hit a creature, you can impose one of the following conditions, which is be knocked prone up to 15 feet away, or can't take reactions. So that's pretty much the same, but they've given them actual names. And this is nice because it kind of matches what people have been saying about weapon masteries and the monk, is that they should be able to, you know, use weapon masteries with their fists. And that's basically what this is now. And then Wholeness of Body is interesting because it just lets you heal yourself as a bonus action a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier instead of just once. I believe the old one... yeah, the old one is you recover hit points equal to 3 times your monk level, which is a lot. Like, that's up to 60 hit points, just but that is as an action, which means that it's not super useful in combat, and you can only do it once per day. This makes it a bonus action, and it's a number of hit points equal to your martial arts die plus your wisdom modifier. So, obviously not like a ton of hit points, but still a good amount, and you can use it more often. And then finally, Fleet Step is easily the coolest ability that the subclass gets, and on its own makes this subclass worth taking. It's so simple and yet so awesome. Like, what it does is, whenever you take any bonus action other than Step of the Wind, you can also use Step of the Wind as part of that same bonus action. So, kind of like what some of the Baldur's Gate 3 subclasses did, you effectively get 2 bonus actions as long as one of those bonus actions is always Step of the Wind. And keep in mind, Step of the Wind doesn't have to cost key points. By default, you just get to take dash, which means that you can basically, like, you literally have no reason to not always dash as a bonus action, in addition to whatever else. Like, even if you're out of key points, you can use your bonus action to attack with your basic martial arts attack and dash. Hell, you can use your bonus action to disengage for free and dash for free 100% of the time. Like, there's so many cool things you could do with it. If you want to go all in, you could pay a single key point, one key point, to activate Patient Defense, get disengage, dodge, and dash, all as part of the same bonus action. Oh my god, that is a lot. And then keep in mind, you still get the bonus ability, so you're also getting temporary hit points from Patient Defense. So you're disengaging, you're dashing, you're dodging, and you're giving yourself temp HP, and that's just as a single bonus action that you can still use whatever you want for your main action. Like, that's a lot. And that's, of course, not even taking into account, you can Flurry of Blows. You know, you can make 3 attacks and still dash as a bonus action. Like, you could do so much with this. It's so cool. Like, honestly, it's kind of insane. And then finally, Quivering Palm. I think it's mostly the same as it used to be. You spend a bunch of key points, and then as an action, you can force them to make a saving throw, and if they fail, if they fail, they basically die, and if they succeed, they take a ton of necrotic damage. Now, they must take a Constitution saving throw, or take a bunch of damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful. So, it doesn't automatically bring them to 0, but it's also more useful in combat, because, yeah, you can replace one of your attacks with this action, whereas previously, it was, I believe, as an action. Let's see here. Yeah, the original version, you had to use your entire action to activate it, whereas the new version, you can use it in place of an attack. So, you can activate it a lot more swiftly in combat, but it does a lot less damage now because it doesn't automatically reduce them to 0 HP. Which I think is fair, because, like, that sets up some potential shenanigans with, like, boss fights, where the monk can just punch somebody and reduce them to 0 HP. If they just roll badly on one saving throw, which, like, a wizard could just use silvery barbs to ensure, you know, that kind of thing. Either way, I think it's fine. The main selling point of this class is the fleet step, let's be real here. Like I said, the fact that they can dash 100% of the time without consuming their... Like, that's effectively what this ability really reads, is you just are always under the effect of dash. It's just that you can't stack it with itself, which is fine. Although I do wonder, technically, I think a rogue could use their cunning action to dash, and then, so like if you're a rogue monk, which would be a interesting backstory, but if you were, then when you take the bonus action, because it's other than Step of the Wind specifically, and Step of the Wind is its own kind of action, which means that in theory, if you are a rogue monk, or like at least a monk that took a small dip into rogue, then you would be able to dash as a bonus action, and then Step of the Wind to dash again as part of the same bonus action, and effectively quadruple your movement for free literally every turn. And that's on top of the fact that at level 11, a monk's move speed is 50 feet. Which means that now, just your effective base move speed is 200 feet. Just without having to spend any resources. You know what? I'm okay with that. You know what? It's about time monks deserve some good stuff. Anyways, this video is getting a little bit long, but I want to go over these spells real quick. So they've added a bunch of changes to spells, and the biggest changes are to the conjuration spells. So they've included most of the conjure stuff, like conjure elemental, minor elementals, fae, woodland beings, etc. And a lot of these used to be spells where you would summon an actual like creature to participate in the fight. And I could imagine, like, that's always been kind of a little bit of a hassle, because it's another health bar, it's another whole, like, set of actions being added to the turn, so turns take longer, yada yada yada. So what they've done is they've turned them into, like, more static effects that have more clearly defined abilities beyond just being, like, a creature. So, like, for example, when you use Conjure Elemental, you summon an elemental spirit that fills a 10-foot cube within range, and like that's it. It doesn't move around. It doesn't. It doesn't have health or anything. It's just a thing that exists on the battlefield. And then now, whenever a creature hostile to you moves within 5 feet of the spirit, you get to make a melee spell attack, like through the elemental spirit. And if you hit it, they take a bunch of damage, which is nice. The damage type, of course, varies based on the element. And then they also become restrained. And then at the start of each of its turns, it can make a saving throw to break free. And if it fails, it just takes more damage. And that's how a lot of these conjuration spells work now. You know, you summon nature spirits that fill in a space around you. You summon things that float around you, etc., etc. Otherwise, they also work as self-buff. So, like, for instance, Conjure Minor Elementals, instead of it just being a smaller version of this, instead, you kind of surround yourself in small elementals, or even, one might say, minor elementals, and they deal... It basically buffs all of your attacks to deal more damage. So now, if you're playing, like, a Spell Sword style class, like a Bladesinger Wizard, or even an Eldritch Knight Fighter, this is just barely within range of an Eldritch Knight, any attack you make deals bonus damage, and that's actually kind of cool, and it also imposes a 15-foot difficult terrain around you. So, like, this is actually a really cool capstone for an Eldritch Knight, because keep in mind, Eldritch Knights, they get their maximum ability at level 17 is, I think, when they get 4th level spells. And so as a result, level 19, oh jeez. But that does still mean it's barely within reach of an Eldritch Knight, because they get wizard spells, and this is a wizard spell, and getting 2d8 extra damage every time you attack something on a fighter... That's not bad, especially given the fact that this is basically capstone, and by that level, they can cast a spell by replacing 2 of their attacks. So, in theory, with 4 attacks, they could spend their first 2 attacks casting Conjure Minor Elementals, and then attack 2 more times, and then Action Surge, and then do another full attack of another 4 attacks, which means that they're triggering this 6 times, because it's any time you land an attack. And that's like 12d8 bonus damage. And on top of the 15-foot difficult terrain, like... This is a really good capstone for fighters, ironically enough. Honestly, with just how good this spell is for fighters, I wouldn't be surprised if that was on purpose. Fount of Moonlight is somewhat similar, but for bards and druids. And then they also buffed all the healing spells, which I thought was interesting. They made it so that now... Because, like, healing has always been kind of awkward, where it's almost never really that worth it to heal somebody on your turn, or at least to spend your entire turn healing. So now Cure Wounds deals 2d8 healing instead of 1d8, and then it scales by double dice each level. And Healing Word is the same way. It does 2d4, and then it adds another 2d4 each level. I personally don't think Healing Word needed the buff, because Healing Word's utility was completely unrelated to the amount of health it restored, because the main benefit of Healing Word is that it's a ranged heal that only takes your bonus action. So you're able to do it without consuming your main action, and if a party member is downed, any amount of healing will heal them. So even if Healing Word just dealt 1 point of healing, that's all you need to revive somebody from being downed. So that's kind of what I think the point of Healing Word was, even if it wasn't intended. So I don't think it really needed the buff. But hey, I'll take it, I guess. And yeah, and Cure Wounds was buffed considerably. And in turn, Mass Healing Word and Mass Cure Wounds were buffed in the same way as well. And then there's a new cantrip called Starry Wisp. Basic, you know, deals D8 radiant damage. I guess it's nice to have a radiant cantrip, because I don't think... Did we have a radiant attack roll cantrip before? I don't think so. There was the radiant, like, burst one, but that was a saving throw cantrip. I don't think we had an attack roll cantrip, like how we had Chill Touch, which I think has been finally renamed to Bone Chill, or something like that, which was necrotic. But yeah, so it's nice to have a radiant one, and its main utility is that it prevents people from turning invisible, which is nice. Other than that, I think that about wraps it up. A lot of the rest of this is just utility and explaining minor mechanics, which I don't feel like getting into right now. So yeah, so to kind of close things off for a minute, like I said at the start, I think there's a lot of great stuff here. Like I said, I'm not an expert on Druids, so by all means, feel free to let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on that. But there's a lot of good stuff for Barbarians, and a lot of good stuff for Monks. I'm really looking forward to the actual 2024 books finally, because I think Monks actually might be good now? It's kind of weird to even consider that with how bad of a track record Monks have, but like, Barbarians actually have meaningfully interesting abilities, and they're no longer restricted to long rests, and Monks are able to actually like restore their key points more quickly, and they actually have like really cool martial arts and things to spend key points on, and they're a lot more versatile and useful. Like, it's hard to believe they're finally going in the right direction, you know? You know, there's always more that could be done, of course, but like, hey, as long as they're pointed in the right direction, I think I'm happy. And so, like I said, by all means, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'll be posting a link to the playtest if you want to read it for yourself, see anything that I missed, or if you have anything to comment on. As always, I'm always happy to continue the conversation down in the comments, and until next time, thank you for watching.